Deputy McNamara, will you move 7 and address the cluster?
Essentially, what my proposed amendment does, and it's, as I said, similar to other deputies' amendments which, with which it's been grouped, would enable this new regulator, which unfortunately I believe, I hope I'm proven wrong, Minister, I sincerely do, but I believe it will be a regulator in name only. It will enable them to collect such information as is required in consultation with Teagasc, who already do quite a lot of work in this regard, to ascertain the cost of production in the state of such agricultural or food products as the Minister deems necessary to ensure fairness and transparency in the food and agriculture supply chain in the state. Now, I suppose merely ascertaining what the cost of production in the state by somebody who is in a regulatory position, I think would be a very important step forward. Because we've we have various estimates of the cost of production, but there's certainly no agreement on it. And I'll give you a very recent example of this, Minister. Just last week, Lidl announced that they were cutting the cost of milk, and they said the Chief Executive Officer of Lidl Ireland, Northern Ireland, said, "Our team has been consistently looking for ways to increase efficiencies and reduce costs in our own operations to help absorb these additional costs as best as possible. That being said, there has recently been some reduction in the cost of milk production, and we're pleased to be in a position to be the first retailer in Ireland to reflect this reduction in our milk prices in store," further underscoring, and that was followed by some sales gibberish. And I use that sort of disparaging term because I've spoken to a number of dairy farmers, and there is simply no reduction in the cost of production in Ireland. Now, Minister, to be clear, the dairy sector has been buoyant for the past number of years, and it's been good times for dairying. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But what I am saying is that it's disingenuous to say that there's a reduction in the cost of production in recent times. Because I'm not aware of any. Foodstuffs have continued to rise. Labour shortages that dairy farmers encounter persist. The cost in fuel, all of these are continuing to drive up the cost of production in the dairy sector. So here we have a retailer saying that there's been a drop in the cost of production. Farm bodies are saying no, there hasn't. And there's nobody to sort of be an independent arbiter. There's nobody to say, well, actually, no, the cost of production hasn't fallen, or actually, no, the cost of production has. So maybe, Minister, you would like to pronounce on whether the cost of production has fallen or whether it hasn't. If you'd like to make that pronouncement, I'd like to know what data you're basing it on and who's advising you. But what I would like is for you and future Ministers for Agriculture to have somebody reliable and to have a reliable office to point to with regard to the cost of production. Therefore, Minister, I would hope that you will either accept this amendment or future amendments that you might bring forward in the Shannon will reflect it.
We started off with a consultation and then at pre-legislative scrutiny stage, at committee stage, which many deputies participated in. They met with key stakeholders, made a submission to myself, which was fully considered. It made 20 recommendations. 18 of those 20 recommendations were either wholly or substantially accepted and incorporated by myself into the bill. So this has been very, very significantly considered. And the objective behind the bill, and it is a historic bill because it will be the first time in the history of the state that there will be a legal, statutory, independent food regulator to bring transparency to the food supply chain. That is the objective behind it. The powers of the bill are very strong in that regard in relation to the capacity to gather information and indeed the capacity for the Minister going forward as well to instruct the regulator to gather any information that he requires that they should be doing as it evolves, or indeed for them to be able to decide to do that. What I don't want to happen is that we set up something that has massive resources doing things which are not necessarily impacting and directly benefiting farmers, or putting those resources where it's going to most make sure that farmers are getting fair play and attacking the issues which are most pertinent to making sure farmers are getting fair income for the work that they're doing. But in terms of the comprehensive assessment this legislation has undergone, I'm absolutely confident that it is that the legislation will ensure the office can carry out this function, and indeed that the capacity is there for the Minister for Agriculture as well to ensure that in cases where that needs to be adjusted, that he has the power to be able to do that as well.
Mr. Deputy McNamara.
Thank you very much. Minister, I regret that it's a fallacy to say that the regulator has strong powers to obtain information, because there's a Sinn Féin amendment to which I know you're proposing amendments, so I'm assuming that you're going to accept their amendment. And that provides that the regulator may seek from businesses within the food chain various pieces of information. But that's all they can do is seek it. It's not an offence not to provide the information. It's not an offence not to give the information whatsoever. And while the regulator will have power to enter premises to inspect documents, they can only do so in two specific circumstances: with the permission of the owner of the premises, or with a circuit court or with a district court warrant where they suspect an offence has taken place. But it's not an offence not to provide the information requested. So what you're doing is you're setting up a regulator to fail. You're setting up an office, all the trappings of an office that will be able to provide transparency and obtain transparency, but without any powers to do so. And that, Minister, it is historic that you're setting up the office, but it is a historic disappointment that you're doing so without giving the regulator the legal powers that they're going to require in order to succeed. Thank you. So I would ask that you continue to consider these amendments and look into the matter, because I believe that you want to do the right thing. I'm not maybe less certain about some elements of your department, given the track record of people, senior civil servants from that department, going on to work for processors and in the food sector generally. It just seems to me to be evidence of how skewed the department is in its approach in favour of processors and large conglomerates rather than primary producers. That's very evidently the focus of your department, and unfortunately this bill does not bring transparency to bear in the retail chain, or in the food chain.
Anyone else? No. Minister, do you want to add anything?
Well, listen, just first of all, on your final comment, Deputy McNamara, and listen, we have a great responsibility here in this chamber to be fair to everyone. Yep. I think your comments are very unfair in relation to the bona fides of everyone working in the Department of Agriculture, from here in Kildare Street right throughout the country. Their work and their job day in, day out is working on behalf of the agriculture sector and farmers in particular. We have one of the best records in this country of serving farmers, of delivering payments, of working to actually make sure that that service is the best in Europe. And that's what our department does. That's what our officials do. The team that have been involved in this have put in massive hours and massive work to bring this legislation forward. The fact that out of whatever 3,000 employees in the Department of Agriculture, I would imagine a minuscule, one or two may go and work somewhere else, which is anyone's right. Either you're right as a deputy and your alternative career whenever you might leave, or whatever, any of us. And it's absolutely unfair to use that as what I would regard as slur on all of those who are working at the moment with the objective of serving farmers. And I just think, I don't think that was particularly fair. And listen, I don't agree either that this is a historic disappointment. Certainly not. And I mean, you can say that. We can say anything we want in this chamber. Saying it doesn't make it so, Deputy McNamara. We put massive work in from this right throughout the process. Many other deputies have been involved from the very outset through pre-legislative scrutiny, massively across this bill to where we've got it here today. It's easy to, at the very end, come up with amendments for the first time and to say that it doesn't do this, to call it toothless, whatever. That's not the case. This is legislation which is very effective, and not only that in terms of the legislation itself, but it gives the capacity as well to the Minister through regulation to ensure that any additional regulation or requirement or instruction that is required is possible through the legislation as well. Because my objective from the outset, from whenever I was in the opposition benches where you are now, was to bring in a regulator which actually would bring transparency to the food supply chain. I don't believe this amendment is necessary at all, Deputy McNamara. I believe the legislation is exceptionally strong.
Time is up. Thank you, Deputy McNamara. Do you want to add anything, or has the motion been put?
Yeah, I think I have 2 minutes to respond. Minister, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who work in the Department of Agriculture who do their job fairly right across the country. I'm talking about the propensity of people at the very top of the department to find their way into top jobs with processors, with dairy co-ops, and with the sector that they had previously regulated. I believe that's a problem. I don't believe it applies to all members of the Department of Agriculture. You said saying it doesn't make it so. Well, Minister, you say that this will bring transparency in the food sector. Saying it doesn't make it so, show me any place in this bill that requires them to provide the information. Yes, if the Sinn Féin amendment that you've proposed to amend is accepted, the regulator may seek the information. Show me some place in the bill that requires them to provide that information if and when it is sought. Please do so. And you constantly talk about coming in at the end of the bill. Well, that's what report stage is for. That's why we have a legislative process. That's why we don't just have a general chat at the very beginning and say, it's all grand now, we can all go home. And you talk about having engaged with the farm bodies. It's implicit from what you say that they're all happy with this bill. But I've spoken to them all, or I've spoken to many of them. I've spoken to the independent farmers, I've spoken to the ICSA, I've spoken to the IFA, and I've spoken to the ICMSA this week. And none of them are happy that your bill has sufficient powers to bring about the transparency that you say you want. But if you want it, and you want your regulator to succeed, I believe that there's already somebody lined up. I wish them the best of luck, I'm sure, as you do. But if you want them to succeed, give them the powers to succeed. Don't put them on a pedestal to fail without the powers that they need to require the retailers, the processors, to outline the prices they're being paid, because only then will we know who's making the money. There's a lot of money being made, but we don't know who's making it. And there's this retail forum. I'll make a prediction that we'll see a reduction in what farmers are getting, but there'll be no reduction in what international corporations are getting for their food products. Once again, farmers will take a hammering for a general problem in the retail sector that we've no idea who's making the money.
Thank you very much. Are you pressing amendment number 7, Deputy McNamara?
I am.
Chuckty Tarhaven Harsh Shin Aberdeen. And you're going to kneel. Stolen Gully Butcher and Kesh, the President is defeated. Vote all. Tá Craige Neil Shaska Cahir near Stain Anya so tá Butcher on Kesh. August Hanlasu Shin Kailte. Amendment number 8 is also in the name of Deputy McNamara. Deputy McNamara to move.
Thanks, Count Corla. I suppose the amendment 8 is once the regulator has determined the minimum cost of production, what to do with it. And it would facilitate the minister to make regulations prescribing the sale or resale of certain agricultural or food items below the cost of production in the state. That's A, and B would enable the minister to simply ban the below-cost selling of all products and food products below the cost of production in the state. And I just want to give an important example of how requiring somebody being a party to a contract, requiring them effectively to produce something below the cost of production can arise, as it arose in recent years in the dairy sector, which, as I have acknowledged, has generally done quite well in recent years. But a cohort of many of them young farmers, all of them almost exclusively new entrants to dairying, would have entered into a contract with some of the dairies to produce milk for a certain price. And of course, because of the years of effective deflation in the food supply chain, prices weren't increasing at all. So it seemed like a good deal. They were signing a contract, they were being offered a certain price for their product, and based on that contract, they were able to go to commercial lenders to borrow money to invest in their, to buy more land perhaps, or to invest in the type of milking parlours which cost hundreds of thousands of euros, which are now commonplace in the dairy sector. But as the cost of production started to rise, then obviously the cost that farmers in the dairy sector were being paid for their products rose with it. And of course they were set on a fixed contract. Now, it would mean that such contracts would be null and void and not have effect. I appreciate that from your party leader, Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach, from his response when I raised this at questions on promised legislation, that he had, I suppose, a concern about what a radical departure, I think, and I don't wish to mischaracterise what he said, but what a departure would be to ban below-cost selling of food items. But it has been done, and it has been done recently. It was done in Spain and in a December 2021 law, a law which seeks, ironically or happily, depending on your position on the matter, which seeks to implement exactly the same EU directive that this bill proposes to implement, and that's Directive 633 of 2019 on unfair trading practices in business-to-business relationships in the agriculture and food supply chain. And that was done to protect food producers in Spain. And if it's good enough for food producers in Spain, and if it's possible, I'm not aware of any infringement proceedings being taken by the Commission. Certainly I am aware that various commentators raise their eyebrows at it across the European Union, but I'm not aware of any infringement proceedings. Maybe the Minister will prove me incorrect. But if Spain can protect its food producers, then I believe Ireland can protect its food producers. And below-cost selling is a damaging thing, because it drives producers out of business. You know, we can sell carrots or lettuce or milk, for that matter, butter, beef, take your pick, as cheaply as you wish in Ireland, but it does drive producers out. Look at the horticulture sector in Clare. When I was a child, 40 years ago now, I suppose, but there were horticulture producers in Ogonnelloe, which Deputy Kelly here will know well, producing for the Limerick market. There were horticulture producers in up around Galway Bay producing for Galway, and there were lots and lots of horticulture producers around County Dublin that have long since gone out of business, been driven out of business. And that's not good for consumers, because they get a different quality product, because invariably you can't have the same quality produce if it's produced one day in Ireland and in the shops the next day if it's brought in from across another part of the world. But it also has an impact on our carbon footprint, and if we're serious about the environment, then we need to stop importing perishable goods by aeroplane. It also means, of course, that supply chain, which is such a long supply chain stretching to another part of the world, can be interrupted very easily and very quickly, and then we don't have domestic producers to fill the gap. We saw that this spring to a limited extent in Ireland, to a much greater extent in Britain, where they were left to rue the impact of below-cost selling on their horticulture producers in particular. But on this issue of below-cost selling, I'll make you a prediction, Minister, as a result of your colleague Neil Richmond's retail forum, that what we'll see is some of the big multiples will do a loss leader on beef during the summer. But that's not for the consumer's benefit, because they'll cut the price of beef to get in the consumers, and then they'll just charge them more for the booze that they're going to drink with the beef, or the coleslaw that they'll eat, or the burger buns or whatever. So they'll make the same profit, consumers will spend the same amount of money, and they'll pass that on to farmers who are already in a precarious position. That will be the only impact. You won't see Kellogg's products or Marmite products or avocados or any imported food items. You won't see them being reduced in cost. But what you'll see is fresh produce from Ireland being hammered again and again and again, while the regulator has no power to do anything about it, because the Irish Minister for Agriculture chose not to give the regulator power to do something about it, whereas his Spanish colleague, with whom he had ample opportunity to engage on this matter since a Spanish bill was introduced in 2021, did do something about it for the benefit of his producers. So I'd urge you, Minister, if you don't want to accept this amendment now, here today, to just think about what can be done in the Shannon, in your own name, not in my name, but so that our producers are protected from the damaging effects of below-cost selling, not just for producers, but for consumers too.
This bill has been thought about and considered for a long time and got lots of consideration. Section 80, for example, Section 80, Part 2, G, provides the capacity for the Minister to make regulations under that section to instruct for the regulator to gather the collection of price and market information to address issues of lack of transparency and information asymmetry in the food supply chain. Those powers are already in the bill. As I said to you, and as I repeatedly say, this bill has got lots of consideration. The absolute commitment here is to ensure we're introducing a bill which is fit for purpose, and not only that, actually can respond and evolve to make sure that farmers are getting and primary food producers are getting the office they need to ensure that there's transparency in the food supply chain. So that's already there. And you asked me to show you, Deputy McNamara, where in the bill it's there. It is there in the bill. It is there in the bill. And that's in relation to number 10, answers your question, and amendment number 10 as well. And listen, so you're all smart people here discussing this. And listen, there's no onus on all of you to be honest about what's possible and what's not possible. You're talking about doing something which is massively significant, massive thing. Not one of you have given an example as to how it would work. No, you didn't. No. No, not one of you have given an example as to how it would work here in Ireland. No, one example. So you're going to just saying that we should introduce a set price for set products, and not one of you have given an example as to how it would work. So what Deputy McNamara's amendment is suggesting is that it can only be sold in a certain product. Let's take beef, okay, Irish beef, could only be sold in Irish supermarkets at a set price, set by the regulator in consultation with Teagasc. That's what you're asking to happen.
That's sold below a certain price.
Not sold below a certain price, okay. Let's say in a supermarket in Ireland, couldn't be sold below a certain price, Irish meat. And also you're saying in your amendment, if I read it right, that also it can't be bought below a certain price to be sold in Ireland. I think that's what you're saying. It's a bit not quite clear, but it seems to be also that a supermarket in Ireland can't buy it off, or anybody in the contract chain, a factory, couldn't buy it off a farmer below that price, right? That's what you're saying, okay? So about 10% of the meat that we produce in Ireland actually gets eaten in Ireland. Only 10%. Okay? Only 10%. So therefore you're saying that meat can only be sold in Ireland at a certain price. And it can only be bought in Ireland at a certain price. But somebody can come in from outside Ireland and buy it off a farmer or a processor at a different price. So 90% of the rest of the beef can be bought at a different price. Okay? So it would only be the Irish customers that are paying the higher price. Only the Irish customers are paying the higher price. Yet 90% of the meat could be bought from outside the country at a much lower price. And then what happens along the border then, Deputy Carthy? You come in here at different times then talking to me about, challenges around the border. So in Donegal or Monaghan then it's bought at a certain price. Northern Ireland, you have different laws, but bought at whatever the rate might be, the going rate might be, more reflective of what world market rates are than what is being set in this particular instance. What do you think is going to happen to supermarkets in Donegal or Monaghan or Cavan or Louth? Where are they going to be going to buy their meat then? So the consumers will be paying a lot more money, but farmers are only getting that higher price then for 10% of the meat they actually produce. That's the reality of what you're actually proposing. So listen, be honest. Don't come in here and say, listen, we can, as the swipe of a pen without giving any examples, put in place legislation that's magically going to give farmers a set price and listen, everybody will be happy ever after. Selling a fallacy. You say it happens in Spain, Deputy McNamara, entirely different scenario. Most products which they would be producing and where this would be applying, they wouldn't be self-sufficient in. They'd be producing for their domestic market. So, and listen, Switzerland, for example, is an example of this. Switzerland has tight borders, high tariffs for foods coming in. They operate lots of the similar rules to what Europe might, but they have a separate market. Food prices are very high in Switzerland, massively high in Switzerland. And the prices farmers get in Switzerland are massively high. But they're producing for a domestic market only, and they have their borders closed. And therefore they can control that. And that works there. So high prices for the consumers and high prices for the farmers, and nothing can get in really other than paying a big tariff. That's what works there. But listen, how many times do we say that we are massive, we are a small country, but we produce enough food for 40 million people around the world? 90% of what we produce gets exported. So you come in here selling a myth, trying to make it sound like, just at the swipe of a pen, you can come in at fifth stage of a bill, instead of, which many other people have actually been down a committee stage for and a pre-legislative scrutiny stage for a long, long time, delving through this, and simply introduce something, and because you say it in legislation, that makes it a reality. And hey presto, this is what we're doing for farmers. We're going to solve all their problems simply with this stroke of legislation, but it simply doesn't stack up. That's the reality. That's the challenge. So what we're seeking to achieve here, given the fact that vast majority of our milk, vast majority of our beef sold abroad, it's determined, the price ultimately the market operates at is determined by the prices we're getting in different parts of the world, whether it's Japan or States or other parts of Europe, for example, or Britain. Prices determine what we get there. We want to ensure that we're putting in place an office that has as many tools and levers as possible to bring transparency to that supply chain, so we can see what's going on in terms of the price we're getting abroad. And the ultimate objective here isn't to create a situation where consumers end up paying way more than what anybody else does across the world, but the farmers don't get to see the benefit of it. Because, as I say, in the relation to beef, even no matter what price you set the price at here and required our own consumers to pay for it, it would only be for 10% of the beef. And it would only affect 10% of the products. The other 90% would be going into other parts of the world at what a world price is. And farmers wouldn't be benefiting, yet everybody would have a more expensive product in the process. So listen, tease it out. Don't be selling the myth. The office I'm seeking to put in place here is one that is historic in terms of it's going to put in a statutory footing, legally independent office, to try and make sure farmers get a fair deal, and to do the very most that is possible given the fact that we're an exporting country. Thank you.
I wish to respond to the Minister's comments. Minister, I suppose what I'm proposing to do in this amendment is to give future ministers the power to introduce such an order. Why do you not want the power to introduce such an order? Because, the minister isn't required by regulation to do anything or any of the amendments that I've proposed. But the minister is facilitated to bring in specific regulations to do stuff. Now, I would have thought the power to introduce a regulation would be something that might be useful to you, to future ministers, might lead to less abuse in the matter. You said that Spain imports lots of food and isn't self-sufficient, and unlike Ireland. Well, I don't see the supermarkets in Spain full of Irish olive oil. In fact, I see Irish supermarkets selling olive oil. Yet that is something that is included very clearly in the ban that was introduced in Spain in 2021. I'm not sure about wine. I simply don't know whether that's included or whether it's not. But Minister, you come in here, you trash this suggestion. I'm not saying that it would be easy to implement or that it would be a panacea. I'm not making any of those promises. But you're the one who's constantly saying, well, we have this regulator. Whoopity-doo, we have a regulator. We haven't given him any powers, him or her, any powers. And I specifically asked you to show me in the legislation where it's an offence not to provide the information requested, and you didn't do so. You pointed to their ability to ask for information. I know they can ask, but you're a professor of economics in UCD or Trinity down the road here can ask. Anybody, I can even ask them. But they don't have to answer. They don't have to answer you either. And you don't want to force them to answer because you don't want the power to do diddly-squat to help anybody. But you do want to give out when somebody gives future ministers who are less limp-wristed than you are with regard to trying to help Irish food producers. You want to stop them having the power to help anybody. And that is a historical failure, Minister.
We're way over. You'll get a chance to come in again if you want us to propose her as a proposer. Nobody? Okay. The Minister.
No, listen, I mean, I see you're watering down what it was you were suggesting before and what everybody else was taking up as your meaning of it, that all, yeah, hey presto, we were going to put in minimum prices, and that's what everybody took up, and you didn't see it correct. I didn't see it correct. I didn't see it correct anybody else here. There's no, listen, that's what you were trying to sell, that this is what you were going to propose. Even Deputy Carthy, who actually participated in the pre-legislative scrutiny on this whole process, didn't even propose that. He's now saying he's going to support your amendment, but he didn't propose it himself through the pre-legislative scrutiny that this provision should be in the legislation like this. So listen, I'm just explaining it as it is. So I mean, the olive oil could be, and listen, I mean, if you're saying that it can't be sold below a certain price in Spain, but it only applies to Spain, that could be like our beef. So maybe we're getting olive oil much cheaper here than the Spanish are, possibly. I don't know how that, but I just explained how it might or how it wouldn't work in relation to our beef because of the fact that it wouldn't deliver. And listen, you asked me earlier on, I was saying that the bill had the Minister had the potential subsequently to introduce regulations requiring the regulator to actually assess the cost of production or gather certain information. You said, show me where, and I've shown you where. It's there in the bill. It's been there in the bill from the very start, Deputy McNamara. So listen, my objective, and this has been something I've been plugging at for years and now delivering in government, is to deliver an office and a regulator which is really going to do as much as possibly can be done in relation to making sure farmers get fair play. Listen, you're backing back now and saying, listen, all this does is it provides the opportunity for it to be done. But I've explained to you, listen, and Deputy Carthy said he objected to below-cost selling at EU level. Listen, I mean, that Ireland did. And listen, we had below-cost selling here in Ireland before. Below-cost selling is different from below-cost buying. The fact that somebody sells it below a certain cost, that doesn't mean that they're going to give a fair price to the person that they're buying it from. So it's really below-cost buying, which is the challenge from a farmer's point of view. The farmer's not overly worried what it's sold at, as long as he gets a good profit on what he's selling it for when it's bought off him. And below-cost selling doesn't affect that.
Thank you. McNamara.
It clearly says that it may be prohibited by regulation. Now, I didn't change it in the last 10 minutes, hour, day or week. That's what it says. That's what I proposed. You possibly didn't read it, but that's your business. Minister, you seem happy with the scenario whereby Irish beef producers should produce below the cost of production and that a minister will have no power to do anything about it. Now, Minister, I don't have all the answers. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm not pretending I have all the answers, but I'm saying that this piece of legislation that you have produced is not the answer without additional powers. Now, Minister, you blame Matt Carthy and myself for not having all the answers. You, Minister, are entrusted with a seal of office. You are the Minister for Agriculture of this state who goes to European Council meetings. You have the privilege, and it's an enormous privilege in this republic. People thought so that there would be an Irish Minister for Agriculture as opposed to just one in London. You could ask your Spanish counterpart, by the way, how's that piece of legislation that you introduced working out? Maybe it's not working out. I don't know. I'm just a single backbencher. You have a whole department full of civil servants. You have the access to the Attorney General's office. Your colleagues across the European Union. You have it all. And the best that you can come up with is that there's nothing I can do to stop beef producers in Ireland having to year in, year out produce below the cost of production. And moreover, I don't want any powers to do anything about it. And you want to fall back on me. I'm not falling back on anything. That's just, it's one idea. That's all I have. But you have no ideas on what you're going to do about this. Because if you had, they'd be contained in legislation. I want this regulator to work, Minister. I believe somebody has been selected, whoever it is. I wish them the best of luck. But what I don't want them to do is to have no powers to force people to... I asked you, where are processors required to provide the information requested?
Thank you, Deputy.
And you still haven't told me where they are required to provide that information. Please don't be disingenuous and provide that information to us.
That concludes the debate on this amendment. So we're on amendment...
Well, the Minister digressed. So did I.
No, that concludes the debate on this amendment. So how stands the amendment? Amendment 8.
Pressed.
The amendment has been pressed. So I see on Keshna Chakti Athar Sunna, ceiste obrigí tá.
Tá.
Teachtaí atá na gcuine obrigí níl. Níl is
Vótáil.
is dótha go bhfuil an cheist rite. Now is féidir vótáil a gabhar.
Vótáil over Dáil.
On the question that the amendment be made per a result, Tá 53, yes 53, Níl 68, no 68. Tá búte ar an gceist.